Have you ever wondered what would actually happen if the United States launched a full-scale ground invasion of Iran? With tensions rising and conflicts drawing in more nations, this question has gone from hypothetical to frighteningly plausible, especially as global powers watch and react. This isn't a movie scenario. It's a question that military planners, intelligence agencies, and world leaders quietly examine because the stakes are enormous. Iran is not a small, isolated state. It sits at the heart of the Middle East, controls access to vital oil routes, maintains powerful regional alliances, and has built its military doctrine around resisting foreign invasion. If such an order were ever given, how would it actually start? The current US/Israel and Iran conflict continues to escalate as more and more countries are being dragged into this war. The question is, if ground invasion is ordered by US, how will it start? Will China, Russia, and North Korea intervene? What are the estimated casualties? To understand the beginning, we need to understand modern American war doctrine. The United States does not begin wars with massive troop columns charging forward. It begins by dominating the skies. Before a single armored division crosses into Iranian territory, the United States would almost certainly initiate a massive air superiority campaign. Fighter jets, stealth bombers, drones, cruise missiles, and cyber warfare units would move first. Their objective would be simple but critical. Blind Iran's defenses. Air defense systems would be targeted. Radar installations destroyed. Command and control centers disrupted. Missile launch sites identified and struck. The purpose would not just be destruction, but paralysis. Without the ability to coordinate, communicate, and track incoming threats, Iran's defensive network would be severely weakened. Simultaneously, naval forces in the Persian Gulf would move into position. Aircraft carrier strike groups would serve as floating air bases. Submarines would position themselves quietly beneath the water, capable of launching long-range cruise missiles. Destroyers equipped with missile defense systems would protect Allied assets and intercept retaliatory strikes. Iran's geography makes naval strategy critical. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important oil choke points in the world. If Iran attempted to block it in retaliation, global oil prices would surge overnight. So early naval dominance would be essential, not just militarily, but economically. While air and sea operations unfold, cyber warfare would likely be deployed. Communications networks could be disrupted, financial systems targeted, infrastructure weakened. Modern war is not fought only with tanks and rifles. It is fought through satellites, data centers, and digital networks. Only after air superiority is firmly established would the conversation shift toward boots on the ground. Once air and naval dominance are achieved, the next phase would be the most dangerous, the ground invasion itself. But Iran is not Iraq in 2003. It is larger, more mountainous, more populated, and far more prepared for asymmetric resistance. Its military doctrine is designed specifically to counter a technologically superior force. The initial ground entry would likely involve multiple axes of advance. Marines could secure coastal positions. Army armored divisions might move through accessible border regions. Airborne units could be deployed to seize strategic infrastructure like airfields or supply hubs. However, this would not be a fast drive to the capital. Iran's terrain favors defenders. Mountain ranges create natural choke points. Urban centers provide dense defensive environments. Desert regions strain supply lines. Urban warfare would likely become one of the defining features of the conflict. Cities are difficult to take without heavy casualties. Every building becomes a potential stronghold, every street a possible ambush site. Iran's Revolutionary Guard forces, trained in both conventional and irregular tactics, would likely avoid direct large-scale tank battles. Instead, they would rely on missile strikes, drone swarms, hit-and-run attacks, and decentralized resistance. Casualty estimates in such a conflict are impossible to predict precisely, but historical parallels offer insight. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 resulted in thousands of coalition deaths and far more Iraqi casualties over years of insurgency. Iran's population is more than double that of Iraq's at the time of invasion. Its military infrastructure is deeper and more dispersed. In a prolonged ground conflict, casualties could reach into the tens of thousands among military forces and potentially far higher among civilians, especially if fighting spreads into major cities. Civilian displacement could number in the millions. Infrastructure destruction would affect water, electricity, and medical systems. The financial cost would also be staggering. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan together cost the United States trillions of dollars over 2 decades. A full-scale invasion of Iran, a larger and more complex theater, could rival or exceed those totals. Direct combat operations, long-term occupation, reconstruction efforts, veteran care, and equipment replacement would accumulate into enormous economic strain. Meanwhile, global markets would react immediately. Oil prices would surge if production or shipping routes were disrupted. Inflation would ripple across economies worldwide. Stock markets would fluctuate wildly. This would not be a regional economic event. It would be global. And yet, the battlefield would only be one layer of the conflict. If the United States invades Iran, the world does not remain neutral. Major powers would be forced to calculate their responses carefully. Russia maintains strategic ties with Iran, including military cooperation. China depends heavily on Middle Eastern energy imports and has expanded its diplomatic influence in the region. North Korea has historically aligned itself rhetorically against U.S. interventionism. But would any of them send troops? Direct military intervention by China or Russia would carry enormous risk. Both are nuclear powers. Engaging U.S. forces directly could trigger catastrophic escalation. Therefore, while diplomatic condemnation and material support are plausible, direct troop deployment remains far less likely unless their own territories or treaty obligations are directly threatened. More probable is indirect involvement, intelligence sharing, weapons transfers, economic assistance, cyber operations, proxy forces operating in neighboring countries. Hezbollah, regional militias, and aligned groups could open secondary fronts, stretching U.S. resources across multiple theaters. The Middle East could become a web of interconnected flashpoints. Israel would remain on high alert. Gulf states would fortify defenses. NATO allies might provide logistical or political support to the United States. The phrase World War III often emerges in discussions like this. But what actually defines a world war? It is not simply a large conflict. It is a conflict involving multiple great powers fighting directly across several continents. For this scenario to become a true global war, China, Russia, or NATO would need to engage directly in sustained combat against each other. That threshold is extraordinarily high because all major powers understand the nuclear consequences. However, escalation does not always follow rational planning. Miscalculations happen. An accidental strike, a misinterpreted radar signal, a regional clash spiraling beyond initial intent. History has shown how quickly alliances can pull nations into broader war. So while World War III would not be inevitable, the risk would undeniably increase in a prolonged ground invasion scenario. Perhaps the most chilling question is whether nuclear weapons would be used. The United States possesses a vast nuclear arsenal. Iran does not officially have nuclear weapons, though its nuclear program has long been a source of international tension. In a conventional ground invasion, nuclear use by the United States would be extremely unlikely unless facing an existential strategic collapse, which is improbable. More concerning is escalation between nuclear-armed global powers. If Russia or China were drawn into direct confrontation, nuclear deterrence doctrines would come into play. These doctrines are built on the principle of mutually assured destruction, meaning that any nuclear exchange would be devastating for all sides. Even without nuclear weapons, the humanitarian consequences would be immense. Millions could be displaced. Refugee crises would strain neighboring countries. Reconstruction could take decades. Political instability might create power vacuums exploited by extremist groups. The long-term geopolitical landscape would shift dramatically. Alliances would realign. Military budgets worldwide would increase. Trust between global powers would deteriorate further. International institutions would be tested in ways not seen since the mid-20th century. So, how would a U.S. ground invasion of Iran begin? It would begin with overwhelming air superiority, followed by naval dominance, cyber warfare, and special operations. Only then would ground troops move in, facing difficult terrain and determined resistance. How many casualties? Potentially tens of thousands or more, with massive civilian suffering and trillions in economic cost. Would China, Russia, or North Korea intervene? Likely indirectly, but direct troop involvement would carry enormous risk and therefore remains uncertain. Would it start World War III? Not necessarily, but it would raise the probability of great power confrontation to one of the highest levels in modern history. In the end, wars of this scale are never simple. They are not clean. They are not predictable. And once they begin, they are incredibly difficult to control. The true question may not be how such a war would start. The real question is whether the world could afford the consequences if it did.